When we look back at 2025 in Southern California, it wasn't just another year. It was a year of defining terms. And today, we're going to connect 5 of the year's biggest stories to show you a larger narrative that's unfolding about a region really at a crossroads, grappling with who it is and where it's headed. So here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll set the stage with the year's central theme. Then we'll dive into a huge shift in culture, and we'll contrast that with a deep systemic crisis that's playing out everywhere. And finally, we'll look at the concrete actions being taken right here in California. And it all leads to a really crucial question about what comes next. So, what was the big story of 2025? Well, it wasn't about asking for permission or, waiting around for validation. It was about setting terms. What does that mean? It means instead of trying to fit into the old systems, people started creating their own. Across the board, the main theme was this powerful shift in perspective, from trying to get a seat at the table to just building a whole new table altogether. And really, this one sentence from an end-of-year review just nails the entire vibe of the year. This isn't just about music or movies. It's about control, it's about narrative, and it's about meaning. This is the idea that's going to guide us through the first part of our explainer, a culture that flat out decided to lead, not follow. Okay, so let's dive into culture, because that's where this idea of setting terms was just impossible to ignore. In 2025, Black creators everywhere weren't just showing up. They were actively taking the reins of their own stories, their work, and how they showed up in the world. I mean, this lyric, it became way more than just part of a song. It was like a cultural password. It reset boundaries. It became a kind of shorthand for talking about where things come from, who gets to tell the story, and who needs to be held accountable. It really brought hip-hop back to its roots as a form of documentation and, maybe most importantly, a form of refusal. And then you've got Megan Thee Stallion, who just perfectly shows the same idea from a whole different angle. As an independent artist, her whole approach was a masterclass in unapologetic ownership. This wasn't about fitting into some pre-approved mold or playing by old respectability rules. No. It was about controlling her art, her image, and her story. Full stop. And you can't talk about this without bringing up Simone Biles. Her words, man, they were still echoing so powerfully in 2025. It went way beyond sports and basically became a blueprint for anyone dealing with public pressure. It framed taking care of yourself not as a weakness, but as an absolutely essential boundary you have to set to survive and excel. So what's the big takeaway here? It's this. The whole idea of what's valuable in culture shifted. Big time. The goal wasn't about getting access to the mainstream or chasing a viral moment anymore. Instead, the focus turned inward to actually owning your work, building a real community, and creating something meaningful that didn't need anyone else's stamp of approval. Okay, so on one side you have all this confidence in the cultural world, but at the very same time, other parts of our society were just falling apart at the seams. This is a crisis that's happening nationwide, and it's hitting places like Southern California incredibly hard. And to really get the scale of it, we're going to look at a case study from Ohio that just lays the grim reality bare. This quote from a mother, Taisha Ferguson, man, it just cuts right to the bone. Her son Quincy's story, even though it's set in Ohio, could be from any major city in America. It pulls back the curtain on a system that, when it's faced with severe mental illness, defaults not to care, but to criminalization. And get this, the data is just staggering. Take a look at Ohio's state psychiatric hospitals. A whopping 90% of patients there now come from the criminal justice system. For decades, we closed down institutions without building up community care to replace them. And what happened? Well, we left a giant vacuum, and jails have become the new front door for treatment. And if that wasn't bad enough, at the exact same time, the actual capacity for care just nosedived. This chart shows the number of patients being served was cut in half over the last decade. So the system is serving way fewer people, and the ones it is serving are almost all caught up in the legal system. It's a vicious cycle that's straining everything to the breaking point. And this is where those numbers become painfully real. This isn't a statistic, it's one man's journey. 17 arrests or citations, 5 different jail stays, and a 100-day wait in jail just to get a hospital bed. This isn't a path to healing. It's a revolving door between the street, a jail cell, and care that just isn't enough. So what's the end result of all this? Well, it's grim. As these hospitals fill up with patients from the justice system, they have to become more restrictive. They're chronically understaffed, which leads to burnout, and an environment that is just more dangerous for everyone, for the patients who desperately need help, and for the staff who are trying to provide it. All right, so let's pivot back to California. Because in the face of all these huge, deep-seated problems, from economic exploitation to a loss of trust, the response wasn't just to throw up your hands. It was action. Let's look at how lawmakers and communities started pushing back with new laws, direct help, and education. Let's start with a really specific problem, but one that affects so many people: tip theft. It is exactly what it sounds like: employers taking tips that belong to their workers. This hits low-wage service workers the hardest, the very people who are the backbone of California's economy. A new state law, SB 648, was designed to finally give them some real protection. So how does it work? Well, the key thing is, before this law, the labor commissioner couldn't just issue a citation for tip theft. Now they have real teeth. They can investigate, they can write citations, and they can hit employers with serious penalties. It gives workers a clear, accessible way to get back the wages that were stolen from them. And look, action isn't just about laws on paper. It's about real, tangible results. Check out this number: $500,000. That's how much money Assemblymember Rhodesia Ransom's constituent program helped get back into residents' pockets. We're talking about real impact that helps families pay rent and buy groceries. And this is really powerful. When the Assemblymember was asked to name the single biggest challenge, she didn't point to a specific policy. She just said one word: revisionism. That is such a concise way of talking about the ongoing battle over history and over the narrative, which you'll notice connects us right back to that cultural theme of who gets to set the terms. And that response, it's also about building for the future. Just look at the growth here. California's State Seal of Civic Engagement, it's an award for high schoolers who are active in their communities, has nearly tripled in just a few years. That's a huge sign of a growing commitment to raising an active, informed next generation. And there's new legislation, AB 422, that's really doubling down on this. This isn't just about encouraging kids to volunteer, it's about actively teaching the pillars of a healthy democracy, understanding how to preserve it, why a free press is so important, and the critical skill of learning how to spot and fight misinformation. Okay, so let's pull all these different threads together, right? We've seen a culture that's bursting with confidence to set its own terms. We've seen a public health system that's pretty much in a state of collapse. And we've seen a political system that's trying to respond. So what does it all tell us about the path forward? Because what 2025 really showed us is this massive, powerful contrast. On the one hand, you have a cultural sphere that's clear, it's decisive, it's defining its own reality. And on the other hand, you have these huge, entrenched systems, social and political, that are slow, overwhelmed, and struggling to even hear the message, let alone adapt to it. And that, right there, leaves us with the big question. The cultural shift is already happening. The terms have been set. But what's the lag time? How long does it take before our institutions, our hospitals, our legislatures, our justice systems, how long does it take for them to finally catch up? That's the question 2025 leaves us with.